Hello, and welcome to my Spring of 2023 Capstone project. I've worked very hard this semester, and I'm really proud of the work I was able to accomplish in both my primary and secondary placements. And I've had a lot of fun, and I'm excited to share with you what I've done so far. So before I get into all the standards that I'm addressing, I just wanted to review them so it's clear. I will be addressing standards 2 through 8 today, starting with standard 2, which is understanding student characteristics, abilities, and learning styles. Standard 3 is using diverse social and cultural constructions of identity. Standard 4 is making informed selections of making informed selections of art content and curricula. Standard 5 is using knowledge of students as learners to plan and differentiate appropriate instruction. Standard 6 is using a contemporary technology to enhance teaching and learning. Standard 7 is conduction of meaningful and appropriate assessments of student learning. And Standard 8 is systematic reflection on personal teaching practices. Before I get into all of these standards, I just wanted to give a brief summary of my experiences so far. Working in Cheyenne, Laramie County School District number 1 has been one of the most rewarding experiences I've had. I truly mean that. I have learned so many things throughout my experiences in both placements I've had so far, and it truly has shown me how to grow into be the best teacher that I can possibly be. I've learned an immense amount of information in such a short time span, and I've built incredibly strong relationships between my mentors and administrators and students, which I truly believe will follow me through the rest of my career. Throughout my experiences, I have learned I hold high value in connecting with my students. Each conversation holds valuable information which can later be used as tools for engagement and creating a positive and inclusive classroom environment. Just as an example, student A says she loves hamsters. Her friend excitedly chimes in, and they all agree that they also love hamsters. They go on to say how they have holed certain hamsters, other friends that they've had experiencing hamsters like brothers. This pre-existing interest, I try to tie this into my lessons as much as I can because I believe students are more engaged and they're excited to learn, and they also retain information easier from having pre-existing knowledge that they can transfer into art curricula. So now jumping into standards 2 through 8, I've accomplished these through January 2nd through April 14th. Starting with standard 2, understanding student characteristics, abilities, and learning styles. I've had many diverse learners who all have vastly different interests, characteristics, and ways of learning. Just as an example, I have taught ESL students, so students who are learning English as a second language, PAL students who are oftentimes students who have special needs, including autism, Asperger's, anything along those lines. I've worked with all kinds of those students. I've also had a lot of work with trauma students or students who have unreliable home lives. Especially working at a Title I school where the students are coming from very different backgrounds. A lot of them are not quite on par with where they need to be academically. So finding differentiation for these students and understanding what they can and can't do, that's been really high on my priority list, and encouraging them to push those skills that they really need to learn. So finding ways to accommodate learning to fit everyone's needs is a high priority for me. Each lesson has tailored differentiation in order to achieve student success for all students, and I truly believe that. It's important to me that all of my students can achieve success in whatever way that may look like for them. This is done through classroom management and environment in the classroom as well. So as an example for our ESL students, in Afflerbach Elementary, where I had my first placement, all of the decorations around the room, they typically have Spanish and English definitions next to them, so students can easily understand what we are talking about when we're discussing colors and materials. It also helps them learn and continue to grow in their English learning. When I'm accommodating for PAL students or students who have special needs, I am looking for different criteria when I am assessing them. So I do a lot of work with the the behavior intervention specialists, a lot of work with the PALS teachers, and we've come up with individualized plans for these students. So this is an example of a PALS student that I have had. She's wonderful, very, very sweet. She does struggle with following directions and understanding exactly what we were looking for when she's completing her assignments. So this was an example of a Zentangle assignment that she had done. When I'm assessing these, I look for content and things that she understands. So for our Zentangle assignment, the students needed to have a blobby drawn shape, which they could turn into a Zentangle flower. And each section of the Zentangle needed to have a different type of pattern in it. I worked one-on-one with the student to make sure she understood that she needed to have individual patterns in each of her sections. And she really took to it. She really understood what we were looking for, and I feel like we really were able to help her achieve that success. Standard 3, which is using diverse social and cultural constructions of identity. So my example for this standard is my 6th grade project, which was the Wingding Dilly ceramic sculptures. My students really enjoyed this. This is one I've only practiced on one other cohort member before, so I wasn't entirely sure how it would go, but it ended up being incredibly successful. Students were to write down 3 positive characteristics, abilities, or accomplishments which they were proud of. Write down 1 animal they were reminded of when they consider that word. And then by taking those animals, which they have picked and created, they were to create a new animal or wingding dilly of their own creation. And once they had a plan down, they would go further on to create this animal in sculpture. So we used clay and a lot of clay techniques, which they were learning, to create these wingding dilly sculptures. I chose this specifically because a lot of the students I was working with, they had very low self-esteem. And I've noticed this through individual conversations with the students, just picking up on the overall atmosphere of the classroom and how they treat themselves versus how they treat other people. So my focus for this lesson was to really get them to realize that I'm proud of who they are and they should be proud of who they are as well. So depending on where students fell, depending on their cultural identity, their social identity, they were able to explore that through this project. Some assistive materials that helped me along with this were PowerPoints, sculpting demo videos, and animal photo references, which were laminated. We also had step-by-step animal drawing guides to help students achieve success. Artists I used for inspiration for this project were Enrique Gomez de Molina and Disney artist and animator Bill Peet. Bill Peet is also the author and illustrator of The Wingding Dilly, which we read prior to creating their project. Here were some examples from students. I loved looking through their sketches. They had some really creative ideas. You can see on the photo on the left, this is a student who was working through his ideas. So his 3 words that he chose were smart. So he realized he was smart, so he wrote that down. Same with nice. Those were both attributes that he was proud of and he wanted to explore in his sculpture. He also really enjoyed reading and he felt that he was successful in reading, and he prided himself on that. So I encouraged him to include that in his Wingding Dilly sculpture. His final drawing composed of a rabbit, an elephant, and a monkey. He had a lot of fun coming up with names for his animals, as well as a lot of other students as well. The photo on the top right was a rhino, pig, and a bat. I think there was a rat in there too. So the student wanted to explore 4 options that he could include in his sculpture. So he chose 4 different animals and 4 positive attributes or just accomplishments that he was proud of. The student on the bottom right, the student was incredibly gifted. He spent a long time working on this trunk, and I had to kind of get him to move past all of the details so he could get his final drawing done, but he really took to this project as well. Here were some of their final ceramic sculptures. So this was prior to being disc fired. The student who made the rabbit, elephant, and monkey, this was his final example on the left. So you can see how he's worked through his drawing process and his idea planning and kind of transferred that over into ceramic skills. Here's some other fun creations. The one on the bottom right was a shrimp, which I thought was very creative. So he's created a shrimp head. You can see the little antennas out there. I also showed students how they can use different tools to create effects on their clay. So adding texture, like feathers. I really encourage them to be creative and experiment with these materials. As a follow-up for this project, this was my very last week at Afflerbaugh Elementary with my students. I made a point to express how proud I was of their creations and hard work. Some of the students even came up to me after this project was finished and they told me that this is the favorite project they've worked on all year, and that made me really happy. Even the students that kind of sometimes struggled to participate and they weren't always engaged, they became engaged in this project. So it was really cool seeing how effective it was for students to be able to talk about themselves and how that interest kind of pushed them into exploring more ideas through their artwork. I also explained that sixth grade is not an easy time for students, and I realized that these students are going through a lot. They're beginning to develop into puberty. They're going through a lot of emotional changes, and I left them with the message that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. It's important to remain true to yourself and be proud of who you already are, because I was already proud of these kids, and I really wanted them to see that they should be proud of the work that they have also created so far. The main theme behind this the main theme behind this project was Bill Pete's book, The Wingding Dilly, which we all read prior to creating anything. So before they even started sketching, we all read this book together. This was a really great way to wrap up my time with the students and let them know that I see value and positive traits in all of them. Overall, this was an incredibly successful project, and one I will continue to teach post-graduation. So going into standard 4, which is making informed selections of art content and curricula, I chose my 8th grade project, which was ceramic chia pets for this. These were students who created a ceramic vessel which could retain water, and they disguised it as an object, person, or animal. So they had a lot of freedom to create what they wanted, especially at a middle school level. I saw value in this because students want to express their own ideas. They're starting to grow and they're starting to become more and more independent. They need less of those step-by-step instruction and more freedom to explore their own personal ideas. I did have criteria where students needed to show design where they wanted their chia seeds to grow. So we used graffito techniques to do that in our clay. They also needed to include 2 areas of addition and creating a line design. So these were kind of the general requirements I asked of them. The rest I just left up to the students, and they came up with some really creative ideas. First, we sketched out a plan. So we drew what we wanted to create by making 3 thumbnail sketches, and then they chose their favorite sketch that they had designed, and they compiled that into a larger image, which they put more detail in and focused on how they wanted their chia to grow, which areas they wanted to focus on, and where they wanted to put that graffito line design in. We also discussed how to prevent breaking and air bubbles from being trapped in clay prior to firing. So I chose this specifically because these students have had prior knowledge in using clay. They've done one clay project before in the semester, so they understood basic techniques on clay. So I wanted to take those basic techniques, which they already knew, and expand on them into more complicated material. So I also wanted them to practice what they've already known. So they created a solid shape or form, and then they learned how to cut it in half and extract the middle before fusing them back together with slip and score techniques. Once the hollow center was there, we went in and created a hole on the top and a hole on the bottom, so we would have drainage holes and an area to add water. We haven't gotten to this point quite yet, but students will eventually be able to grow their own chia pets. So we have chia seeds for students to apply on their ceramic pieces after bisque firing. We've worked with the ag teacher on this because she knows a little bit more about how to grow successfully. We're also borrowing grow lights from her so we can actively watch the chia seeds grow from our ceramic chia pets. Um, Students learned about the historical meaning behind original chia pets, which were created and used in religious purposes during Catholic Lent season in Oaxaca, Mexico. So I taught them about where chia pets originally came from, which was Oaxaca, and they were used in placing on altars during Lent season. So they represented resurrection and the the renewal of life. Those were later brought into America and created into popular chia pets, which kind of blew up in the 80s and 90s a little bit. So we learned about that. And once we had a little bit of context and historical information, we went into creating. Um, by offering these students choice in their creations, all of my students have been participating enthusiastically, and class attendance has been a lot higher than typical. I don't know if there is a strong correlation there. It's been after spring break, so that might be partly why there is a little bit higher attendance. Maybe students are realizing they need to kind of pick up their grades a little bit, but it's interesting to see how attendance has changed since starting this Chia Pet project because they have all been present more often than not. This was an example of how we planned out our chia pets. This was my shown example, which I showed the students, where we came up with 3 thumbnail sketches, chose our favorite sketch, and then expanded on that by adding details, a sgraffito design where we wanted our chia to grow, and then I asked them to color in a little bit of green so they understood what their piece would look like fully after the chia seeds had grown on it and how it would affect their design. Here is some of the work my students have done so far. We haven't quite gotten to firing them and applying the chia seeds yet, but they've really done a great job creating these vessels. They've been very creative. The one on the left is a volcano, so the chia seeds will be spilling out of the side like lava. The one in the middle is a rabbit where the chia seeds will all be growing on the tail. The tail is also hollowed out, and we will be using cotton balls, which are soaked in water, to stick inside of these and also misting them so chia seeds will successfully grow on all of their pieces. The one on the far right is going to be a mushroom, and each of the spots on her mushroom she wanted to include sgraffito designs. She hasn't quite done that at this process yet, but I thought it was a really clever design and I wanted to share it. For standard 5, which is knowledge of students as learners to plan and differentiate appropriate instruction. So I chose my first grade lesson plan, which I created, which was peanut butter and jelly sandwich collages. The kids really, really loved this, and they learned a lot of different skills as they were working through this process. Specific skills that I wanted to teach these kids were introduction into collage making, line, which is thick versus thin. They also learned about horizontal and vertical lines and how to create plaid patterning through those techniques. They created organic and geometric shapes through collaboration with their peers and independent work. So when they were creating these objects, they would trace them out. They learned about organic and geometric shapes. And they also got to work together as they were tracing, since it was a little bit harder for first grade hands to accomplish this. So they got a lot of work together and they had a lot of fun. We also talked about how to safely and carefully cut glue and trace objects. Some of these kids, as they come into kindergarten, they've never picked up a crayon before in their life, which was kind of a struggle. A lot of times you think these kids already have knowledge on how to use crayons and how to safely use scissors, but understanding where these kids were and how to help them successfully grow as artists was a large priority that I had in mind as I was working through this. They also got to do a lot of experimentation with materials. We learned how to create tactile painting through mixing cornstarch and acrylic paint. That's how they created their tactile peanut butter and jelly, which they applied onto their collages with real spoons. So they learned about the process of how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for themselves through creating their artwork as well. All right, so my reasoning for this project Within Title I schools, it is not uncommon for many of the students who are just beginning elementary to have little to no artistic guidance prior. So this was a lesson which taught multiple skills at once and created content which students are all familiar with, which was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Many of these students already have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch, or they see their friends having them for lunch. So it was an idea that they were familiar with, and they were all very excited to create their collages. We worked step by step, and students were provided multiple opportunities to choose their own colors, designs, and create a masterpiece that was truly unique and specific to them. Each collage ended up with a lot of variety, and they were all really individual. Students were also able to collaborate with one another, like I was talking about before, with using stencils. And we provided supplemental materials for a lot of the students who need it. We didn't have too many students in these classes who truly needed a lot of differentiation. Through working together and doing the step-by-step, they were able to accomplish these things on their own. But we did have those materials ready for anyone who needed them. I spent a lot of time and thought into planning this lesson and really focusing on how I could help these students grow artistically and develop these concepts and techniques. This was an example of how I worked through my ideas. I started off with the image in the middle on the left side, where I was just trying to plan out how I could create these tactile collages while still allowing kids to achieve success without making it too difficult for them. I realized I didn't like the original checkered patterning I made, and I thought it would be more fun to teach them plaid patterning, because they would learn about horizontal and vertical lines as well as thick and thin lines. The image on the top left was an example of some of the stencils the children used. So we had the crust template and the middle template, and they had to accurately put it to the right piece of paper. So they were making a true peanut butter and jelly sandwich that had the right colors on each section. And students also had the opportunity to choose their own types of jelly. They all had the same kind of peanut butter, but they could choose grape versus strawberry jelly. And they could also pick their own colors on their tablecloths, their own plate designs, and choosing their own napkins. So they could really make it their own placemat, like they were having a true peanut butter and jelly picnic. Here were some examples from my students. They all had a lot of variety and they all achieved success, but they did them a little bit differently. I was really proud of how they all accomplished this. The one in the middle on the top row got a little carried away with her line designs, but she still accomplished what I was asking of her. And she made a really interesting and unique plaid patterning background. So it was cool to see how all of the students tackled their challenges in different ways. Standard 6, which was use of contemporary technology to enhance teaching and learning. I used a ton of technology throughout my student teaching. This included everything from OneNote to Google Photos to iMovie, document cameras, Canvas, Artsonia, iPads, Infinite Campus, PowerPoint. I used a lot of PowerPoint. Microsoft Word, Spotify, as well as many features including screen recordings and screen sharing. I found incredibly useful technology that aids in instruction and showing different ways that students can achieve their own success. So I used a lot of visual demos, and I used these through iMovie to create interesting and fast video demos that students would be able to sit in, focus, and retain their attention so they wouldn't be distracted. I know oftentimes in-person demos can become a little bit long as you're working right in front of the students. So I would create these demos prior to coming into the classroom, and I would have them all set and ready, and I would play them so the students could watch what I'm doing, and I would explain each step as I was playing the video. Technology is also something students have grown up around and they understand, so it makes their learning really relatable. I know right now TikTok and Instagram are pretty big for a lot of kids, especially when they're getting a little bit older, especially in the middle school levels. So I tried to think about what retained their information, or I'm sorry, what retained their attention when watching these TikTok videos and how I could transfer that into my own teaching style. So I tried to keep my videos brief. I put music to them so it would auditorily hold their attention. And I would just explain what I'm doing through each step. So I could also be there present and still have hands-on teaching and instruction. This is an example of a short video demo I created. Students made Zentangle flowers, which I showed in previous slide. So I will show my video demo, which I created for that. So as I'm making these videos, I talk about what maybe I did wrong in my demos and how students can be doing them differently. For the most part, I tried to keep my demos as accurate as possible so students knew exactly what to do. You. So that one was about a minute long. This was a very brief project that we did as we were explaining introductions, expectations for our first quarter. I'm sorry, for our first quarter with new students. So after spring break, we started an entirely new quarter for our seventh graders. So this was a project they worked on while we talked about expectations. It gave them something to do while they could still listen. So expectation day was not entirely boring for them, and they could still retain that information while they're working on something artistically. So for my visual demonstrations, I do OneNote a lot. We use them for student check-ins, so students can leave responses when they enter class, and they can choose to either talk about a rose, which is something positive that happened to them recently, a thorn, which is something negative that happened to them recently, or a bud, which is something that they're looking forward to. This is just a way for us to informally check in with students, see how they're doing, see anything that's going on in their life that we might need to be aware of. A lot of the students really enjoy doing this. We also have a discussion after our check-ins to see if anyone would like to share. This gives opportunities for students to express how they're feeling, how their days are going, how their weeks are going, and an opportunity to connect with other students who might be feeling the same way. Spotify was another really big technology that I used. I used this as a class behavior system. So students had to work together with their table mates. And if they had good behavior, they would receive no strikes if I had to remind them. I would remind them once. If I had to remind them twice, it had to turn into a strike. If they received a strike for their table for the day, they were not able to participate in this activity. But if they received no strikes, they were able to have a sticky note handed to them so they could write down one school appropriate song, which could be added to their class playlist. These class playlists were played after instruction was given in each class. So they would play during work time. And this was an opportunity for kids to share their own taste in music and also listen to others in their classroom. They had a lot of fun with this. It was really successful in trying to correct behavior because the kids did enjoy listening to music. Many of them get in trouble for listening to music in their AirPods all the time. So this gave them an opportunity to still enjoy music that they want to listen to as long as it is school appropriate. We also use Artsonia a lot. Artsonia is online artwork submissions that follow students through their education. This runs pre-K through 12th grade. All of their artworks are forever stored here, so they can always have access to them. This was a really useful tool for kids, especially at the middle school level, to understand how to upload and submit their own artwork to an online submission. And they can always go back and see previous artworks that they've created. Even if something happens to their true artwork, they always have a digital copy of what their artwork was. iMovie was something I used for all of my visual demonstrations and artwork in art making. It really helped me because I was able to speed up sections, add in definitions or titles, and explain what I'm doing verbally as well as like visually, so I would have both on the screen as I was explaining each step. PowerPoint. I used a lot of PowerPoint. I also created a couple instances where I had interactive PowerPoints for the kids. I created a in-class field trip for my first graders when they were learning about biofilm. We took a river trip and I had the clicker in my hand, so I would click through the slides as we were going down the river. And each slide would change as we were rowing further and further down the river to get a closer look at biofilm. Once we were finally down our river, we pulled out our binoculars and looked at biofilm up close so they understood what truly was in biofilm and all the tiny different microorganisms that lived inside of it. It was really funny. I didn't know kids would take to this, but I had a bunch of first graders just mimicking microorganisms. So they were leaving class talking about microorganisms and biofilm, and it was really incredible to see these young first graders talking about complex ideas. It was really cool. I loved it. All right, so here are some visual examples of how I would use technology in my room. This photo in the bottom left was when we went on our river trip. I also dressed up as their river guide. So we sat on the carpet and rowed our boat closer and closer to the biofilm. I was their guide, so I would show them each step as we moved throughout the river. The photo in the top left was an example of a packet, which I had printed off for students as they were working through their Tim Burton drawing portraits. So just so they would remember that each step of their portrait needed to have certain aspects. So for their eyebrows, they really needed to be bold and enhance expression. So I would write that down in a note and also include some visual examples of how students could achieve that. The picture in the top left was, I'm sorry, in the middle, kind of middle upper center. That was a virtual day assignment where students were requested to draw a sea turtle. And I provided a demo for them as well, so they could follow along with me or use their own creative techniques to accomplish this. But they just had to use watercolor brush techniques and a bold black line to achieve this. The photo on the bottom middle was an example of a mascot for these class playlists that I made. This was Frida Kahlo Wazowski. So Mike Wazowski from Monsters Inc. They came up with these mascots on their own. And so they always knew that their class was Mike Wazowski, Frida Kahlo. Another one was like the Fuzzy Ducklings. So each class had a competition and they could kind of compete to see who would get the most music on their own class playlist. The photo in the right side was an example of a poster I made for this as well. So students knew what I was looking for and expectations for how they could achieve adding songs into their own playlist. Standard 7 was conduction of meaningful and appropriate assessment of student learning. When assessing student work at the secondary level, it can be broken down into two main categories, which was the artwork itself and the reflection on the artwork. I enjoy assessing my students this way because it allows for students to self-reflect on their own artwork. And even if a student did poorly on a art making process or the final piece of artwork which they created, these reflections allow for improvement because they're allowed to explain their process, what went well, something that didn't go so well. It also gives them a chance to give me insight on their effort, attendance, and any other factors that might have affected their art, so I can grade fairly. Students submit all of their work through OneNote, where the class has the ability to collaborate and have individual digital art portfolios. The students use these art portfolios and upload professional pictures of their work and answer questions and prompts relating to their process. This is typically how we assess work at the secondary level at McCormick Middle School. It really gives students a chance to understand how art and technology can be crossed over and how they should be uploading their photos and being reflective on the pieces that they've created, especially when they're starting to go through 8th grade because they're going to be entering high school soon, which has higher expectations as far as submitting their work, showing their work in a professional manner, and understanding how they can present themselves as a true professional artist. When I introduce a new project, I go over the project requirements as clearly as I can, and I explain exactly what I'm going to be looking for when I'm grading. This allows transparency between myself and my students, and it sets expectations for what I'm looking for in their work. I do this prior to any creation and assignment so students know exactly what they're supposed to be doing and how I will be grading them. This was an example of a PowerPoint I made. We made multicultural tiki totems for a school dance which they had. After they finished their tiki totems, they presented them and put them up in the hallways for the dance as decorations. So other students could walk past them and take pictures with them. And we also learned about the Polynesian Triangle. We learned about Easter Island, Polynesia, and Hawaii, and how that whole area has a lot of influence on one another, and how tiki totems have been created through that. This example shows specifically how I'm showing them. I'm looking for implied texture. So this was a requirement for one of their projects in their tikis. They really needed to show implied texture. We also created cuts in our top and bottom to create a wood grain effect. So our tikis looked like they were true wooden heads. This was an example of a student's digital art portfolio with their finished tiki totem. I asked them to fill in questions on complementary colors and implied texture because those were two areas that I really wanted them to focus on as they were working through this. This was an independent assignment that was offered as an alternative to creating a Hawaiian mural, which was also displayed as a dance. The murals were a collaborative project, so you would have to work together in groups. If students did not feel comfortable working in groups and they wanted to work independently instead, they had the option to work on their tiki totems. So this was an individual reflection for a tiki totem. Here was an example for my virtual day and how I set up my expectations for students. I clearly list them. I even list the point breakdown so they understand if they missed a couple points, this is probably how they missed them and how they could improve in the future. So I try to show as much transparency between myself and my students. I think it just helps our relationship. It helps the students achieve success. And truly, I am there as their teacher to help them succeed and grow in art. And that is always going to be my number one priority. Students did really well. They still had a chance to put their own flair on these designs. The one in the top right, you can see all of the detail she's put into this shell. It was not required of her, but it was something that I asked to put an individual design in. So all of these students did individual designs while still following the criteria and requirements asked of them. For my formative assessment, all of that was my summative assessment, but for my formative, I never sit down when I am in the classroom. It's exhausting, but it is worth it to me to go around and make those individual relationships with students so I can understand where they're at, not only academically, but mentally, and how I can help them grow and achieve success in however way that may look for them. So when I'm formatively assessing these students, I constantly make rounds throughout the room, checking in one-on-one with students. I try to speak to each student in my class at least once every class period so I can see the progress they're making, how they're feeling about the work, and how I can help them improve. I also use a lot of rewards for active participation in classroom discussion. So I use stickers, which have been really successful. All of the students have water bottles, which they love to decorate. So by offering them stickers as rewards, they all really want to raise their hand and get a cool sticker. They try to switch with each other after class is done. And overall, it's been a really successful tool for formatively assessing students and getting students to participate in active discussions. I also use food rewards such as Tootsie Rolls or mints. I don't want them to become a distraction, so I purposely choose something that they can open quickly, stick in their mouth, and just leave it in there. So gum, mint, Tootsie Rolls, those are all really good examples that I use in my own classroom. So discovery through formative assessment. Students, prior to making their GBC, they made a Zentangle assignment, which was the blobby flower shape I showed previously. Um, for their GVC project, they explored the elements of art. So they looked into line, color, shape, form, shading, value, and texture. So these were all elements that they explored. Prior to making this GVC, we've done this twice now, last quarter and this quarter. Last quarter, students did not have the Zentangle project, and I have seen such a difference between the students in this quarter who have had that experience doing Zentangling. They understand how to create controlled lines, have nice craftsmanship when creating those, and experiment with different types of line. So since doing the Zentangle project, all of the students have really just taken off on the line section for their GVC. They understand exactly what to do, and they've made some really incredible designs so far. I'm always going to transfer this if I have students do a big project like a element GVC where they need to focus on certain elements. Having a little bit of contextual background, I think, is really beneficial for these students. For Standard 8, which was systematic reflection on personal teaching practice, throughout my whole time as a student teacher, I try to reflect on my own teaching and the teachings of others around me as often as I can. I self-reflect on my own time and think through things which were successful, things that were not as successful. I use a lot of sticky notes as I'm working throughout the day. If I notice something that maybe I need to improve on as their teacher, I wrote that down on a sticky note and I would attach it to my lesson. So I know when I go back to teach that lesson, what I need to be working on, especially if I have multiple classes learning the same thing. I know for my first graders at Afflerbach, I had 3 separate first grade classes. So if I would teach the first class and realize that something wasn't working, I would try to fix that immediately before the next class comes in so I can improve that and give the best instruction that I can for those students. I also sent out a survey for my middle school students at McCormick, so they can give me feedback on how I have been as their student teacher and things that I have done well, things that I can improve on. It also gives me a little bit of insight onto things that students wish they could be creating in the art room, things that they don't enjoy doing, and how much they enjoy spending time in the art room, which is also important to me. Not every student is going to love art, but I try to make art as exciting and accommodative to everyone. So getting that feedback from the students was really beneficial and reflecting on my own teaching practices. Here's an example from my survey. I will briefly run through these questions, but it was really interesting to see some of the feedback from it. I started off by just leaving a little introduction, letting the kids know how proud I have been of their work they've accomplished this quarter. And I asked them to take a minute to fill out the survey and let me know how I've done as their teacher so far. All of the students had class time to work on this, so it was not assigned as homework. It was something that they have done in class, which really helped participation. I don't think students would have done this if it was asked of them as homework, but giving them class time to do it was really beneficial. So one of the questions I asked them was, what has been your favorite project you've created in this class? The Squiggle GVC was the one I've been talking about where we focused on the elements or the wiggle art. That's what they're talking about there. Students also learned soap carving. That was a project that was originally led by Miss Bruder, that was not led by me, but it was really interesting to see how the kids took to it and how they could understand subtractive sculpture. They really enjoyed it. This was a scaling system. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you enjoy coming into the art room during your day? Some of the answers I was hoping they would be higher than 3, but really it still made me happy seeing the overwhelming amount were enjoying coming into the art room and learning about art and just enjoying their time there. So I also asked about favorite tools that I have used since student teaching. So I've used stickers for participation as well as candy. We used candy as an art tool to create our GVC. So when we're creating an abstract wiggle line, students put a piece of candy on their paper and they pushed it around their paper to create a abstract wiggle line. Once they were finished with this step, they all got to eat the piece of candy, which they really enjoyed. And it worked a lot better than some of the other materials I was originally planning on using. So I'm glad I was able to get some of that feedback back. I also asked about the video demos and class playlist. A lot of the students really enjoyed the class playlist. I don't have an example of a video demo on here, but quite a few students enjoyed the video demos and they said it was beneficial to helping them learn and understand expectations for their artwork. This was probably the most insightful question I have asked the students. I asked if I could work on one thing to improve as their teacher, what they would suggest. And many of the students didn't say much. They said, you did a good job, you were nice, you were kind, you helped me through my work. But there was a few students that did say I needed to be a little bit more strict in my teaching, which was really helpful since getting this feedback I have worked on applying myself a little bit more in this fourth quarter and being a little bit harsher on students who need redirection. And it has actually improved our relationships and the amount of respect that we have between one another since then. So having these responses was really beneficial to me. Then I asked them, what is something I've been very successful with as your teacher? A lot of the kids said giving one-on-one advice, walking around the room, helping individual students as they need assistance, which is something that I do anyways. I absolutely love this. I would not want to sit down in an art room anytime. So I don't see this changing at all, but it was nice to hear that students did see value in this and they appreciated the time that I have spent walking around and helping them one-on-one. I also really enjoyed this section. This was on a scale of 1 to 5. How helpful is it to have one-on-one instruction from me? There was only a small handful of students that said they did not like the instruction that I would give to them one-on-one, which is fine. I was expecting a couple students to say that, but I was not prepared for the amount of students who overwhelmingly appreciated the help I would give to them one-on-one. And it made me feel really good about what I've been doing so far and how I've been helping these kids and their individual problems as they arise when they're working through their artwork. This was just a last section I added on there if they had any other comments for me. For the most part, they just said, thank you, good job. There were a few students that added specific things in there. One of them was a student that just said, thank you for calling me by a nickname, which was Addie. I will not say her full name. But a lot of her teachers, which she has so far in the year, they choose not to do that. And showing her that I care enough to take the time and address her by whichever name she would prefer to be addressed by, that made a huge difference in building our own relationship between one another. And how she feels when she walks into the art room, when she feels into, or I'm sorry, she told me when she walks into the art room, she feels comfortable. She feels that she can express herself however she would like to be. And just hearing that really made me happy. Here's an example of some of my sticky notes I would write and continuously attach to my lesson plans. Especially for the younger kids, there were certain things that I didn't think to mention, like wiping your paintbrush on the lip of your cup before painting. I do that naturally, and it's something that I didn't really think to instruct kids to do, but especially kids that have little to no artistic guidance prior to coming into school, they really need those reminders and specific instruction on what they need to be doing and what they do not need to be doing. So these were very helpful when addressing those issues. Here were a few projects which I did not include in standards, but I am so proud of the work that they've done. These are decorations that my students have just finished for their school dance, which happened last Friday. They made tiki totems, which you can see on the left here. Students were asked to explore implied texture by using texture plates and crayon rubbings to convey wood grain. Excuse me. They were also asked to incorporate at least 2 complementary colors next to each other on each of their tiki faces. Some of them achieved this more successfully than others, but for the most part, kids really understood what they were supposed to do, and they made some really interesting and unique tiki totems. The project on the right was one that the eighth graders made. Both of these were eighth graders. The one on the right, these students have been working on it for, I think, 2 weeks, but they have really taken to this project. And they got excited to learn how to use tempera paint to create stains, which could be then used as a photo backdrop or a mural for them to take photos in front of during their school dance. So they made 3 separate murals. This one was all SpongeBob themed since it was under the sea. So they created all sorts of sea animals in there and included SpongeBob's house as well as a couple of other characters from SpongeBob. The photo on the right was another mural which students did. They had so much fun doing this. So did I, if you couldn't tell. And they just really loved it. And I think I would love to do another mural project like this because the kids really took to it and they were really proud of the work they did. They were taking photos in front of it, getting all excited to show their friends, like, oh, I made this shark, I made this wave. And just seeing that ownership of work that they have participated in, especially through collaboration, it was really cool to see. The photo on the left was one that I did not get to include in any of my standards, but I was really proud of this lesson. Students made biofilm bubble prints by using markers which had soaked in water overnight. These were dead markers and we normally would throw them away, but I wanted to repurpose them into another project. So the water absorbed the color from the markers that were supposedly dead, and then we threw away the markers after there was no pigment left in them. We then added a little bit of dish soap and acrylic paint to really strengthen those pigments and really make them pop into greens and blues, which would represent biofilm as students created their bubble prints. They had a cup that they would put the mixture into, take a straw and blow into the straw so the bubbles would rise up. This was also an example of how biofilm grows upon itself, which I demonstrated with my mentor teacher, Shannon Brown. We would blow the bubbles out of a cup, blow them off so students could see how biofilm separates. And it lands in a new area, which was where my mentor caught it, so the students didn't freak out over bubbles landing on the floor. So students could see a visual demonstration of how biofilm separates, builds, and grows upon itself. After seeing the demo, they then made their own biofilm prints by taking cardstock paper and pressing it down on the bubbles that they have made. Once their prints were dry, they went back in with Sharpie to create different microorganisms that lived inside of their biofilm. All of the students really had fun with this, and no one drank paint, which I was thrilled about. I was very specific, saying, do not drink paint through the straw. You don't drink through this straw like a normal straw. You blow through it. And having that specific instruction, I think, was really helpful in preventing any kids from drinking paint that day. Last but not least, I wanted to thank everyone so much for just supporting me, all of my teachers and professors, any other people that I have had in my life, my mentor teachers. I could not have gotten this far without the help of all of you. So I wanted to thank you so much for your time, for your effort, and everything that you have done to help me succeed as an art teacher. I thank you so, so much. And I could not have done this without you. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed my spring of 2023 capstone project. Have a good day.